afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Peters at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm delighted to be introducing you to a new author, Alex Schulman, who's joining us from Stockholm in Sweden. And Patrick is holding up a copy of his first novel, The Survivors. Our hostess, who I hope is armed with lots of questions, is Ivy Pochoda, who's actually joining us from Los Angeles. And her most recent book is These Women. Patrick actually did a wonderful conversation with Ivy about these women some time back. So since Alex is new to an American audience, I thought I would take a little time here to read a biography. Let me also say that Facebook, which is where normally an audience would be watching this, is not available today on Monday, October, what day is today? The 3rd, right? So this is going to be a conversation without a question and answer, for which we apologize. But there's a podcast available and the live recording. So we hope that will make you happy. Anyway, let's talk about Alex. So I won't reveal his age, although you could figure that out. Was born in, I'm not going to be able to say this right. Pronounce it for me.
What do you need help with?
I will say Skåne, but that I'm sure that's not right.
Yeah, no, it's Skåne.
I knew it. In the south of Sweden and grew up near Stockholm. He's been a journalist, a blogger, a television and radio host, and has produced several stage performances. Since 2012, he runs Sweden's most popular weekly podcast, Alex and Sigge, with several 100,000 listeners each week. His first 4 books are basically autobiographical. In 2009, he published Hurry to Love, dedicated to his deceased father. Then his second book was dedicated to, or at least about his relationship with his wife, his third about his mother, and the fourth, which became a runaway bestseller called Burn All My Letters, preceded this, The Survivors, his first novel. Alex, why was Burn All My Letters a runaway bestseller, aside from the quality of your prose and all that?
Beside that, I don't know. Yes, I know. I know that the story, when I got the material from it, I knew that I will never get this material again in my life. So the story is about, I can tell you shortly, it's about my grandfather and grandmother, and I discovered secret love notes between my grandmother and a very famous Swedish author called Olof Lagercrantz. So the story is about their love affair, the love affair of a century, you could say, and the way it affected not only them in their life, but also, you know, their children and also me.
How wonderful that you've been able to mine your own family for so much literary material.
Yeah.
That's great. So let me introduce Ivy Pochoda briefly. She has written Wonder Valley and These Women, and I think it has a wonderful structure to it, in that, as I understand it, Ivy, although Patrick can say this better than I can, you were less interested in the serial killer, who might be just some guy, than you were in the women who were his victims. Patrick, what do you remember about These Women?
I loved it. I mean, it was a fantastic book. I mean, I think Ivy is kind of at the part of a group of writers right now who are really reinventing LA, the LA crime novel. You know, and I thought These Women was, you know, a modern classic of LA crime literature. You know, you took us into a part of LA that has really not explored, at least to my knowledge, before in any depth in literature and the crime novel. I don't know what to say about it other than, you know, Ivy has a wonderful voice, you know, and we talked last year about at length about just the Los Angeles novel and Western fiction in general. And so I'm anxious to hear. I know Ivy, a year ago when we were talking, you were discussing maybe writing a Western, a Los Angeles Western novel. Is that what you went with?
It's even stranger than that. I did yeah, I mean, basically I'm writing a novella with Smith Henderson that's set in the West. So
really?
who I know you also interviewed. So yeah, it's a little pivot. But yes, my new book is a Western-ish novel set in Los Angeles. Actually, it starts in Arizona, oddly.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Fabulous. Well, you've obviously enjoyed collaborating, and I'm so sorry that your collaboration on YA books with Kobe Bryant was tragically cut short. We met him at a Bookseller Association convention, and he was so gorgeous and so sort of larger than life. It must have been a stunner to work with him.
Those are two very, very apt ways to describe him. He was definitely larger than life and incredibly gorgeous. So thank you.
So Alex, you are the focus here of what we're going to be talking about. And Ivy, I certainly hope, has lots of questions. But I did want to say one of the reasons that I introduced your first 4 novels was because it seems to me, having read The Survivors, that that material must have informed your conception of this book, because it really is about family and about a mother and son's relationships with each other and with her.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it could be a smooth step into the fictional world to keep the key elements of my life, to have something to hang on to when you're taking the first steps into writing fiction. My first idea of writing fiction was that it was going to be so easy, because now I could, invent anything I wanted. I could just write, but it turned out it was very difficult, and when starting to write, I thought it was so. It helped me a bit to have the universe that I was acquainted with in a way.
Ivy, it's over to you.
Okay, of course. So, well, I just wanted to clarify your previous books. We refer to them as autofiction. Is that how you would refer to them, or memoir? I just don't want to use the incorrect term.
So, I mean, we have this great debate in Sweden now about autofiction, and people are just hating it so much at the moment. So I cannot even speak the words here. But to you, I hope I can. I would say it's autofiction. It's books about real occurrences, about things that happen in my life. But it's also, they're called novels because I wanted to, be a bit more free to, elaborate with the storytelling and things like that. But I mean, the basis is it's from the real life.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I had it correctly because I saw both terms were being used. That's really interesting. It's funny. I just wanted to, we'll talk about that duality in a second, like the difference between a novel and autofiction, but I sort of wanted to start by talking about the fact that in The Survivors, there are lots of other dualities that exist throughout this book, and it's a book that just seems to be like in a liminal space. There's, everything is mirrored, or there's 2 of everything. But first and foremost, there are 2 timelines in that you're dealing with here. One runs front to back, past to present, another runs present to past. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, how it came about. Did you have the idea to tell the book in 2 time periods? Did the material inform that decision?
Well, I think that's, I mean, it really started off with me having a lunch with a friend of mine that's a police officer. He's an investigator for crimes. And he told me that it's a commonly used technique in Sweden and in other countries that when you interrogate a suspect, you usually ask them to tell what happened backwards, because it's much harder to lie when you're telling a story backwards. And I thought that was very intriguing, and I also thought about, when you're in a trauma, you tend to think about what happened, step by step going backwards. So I thought that if I'm going to make, this book about a trauma for these boys, it could be an interesting way of telling the story to do one of the timelines backwards. It also adds a bit mystery, I think, because I wanted, in the chronological stories, I wanted to have a bit slower paced and have time to, be in the scenes. And I could afford that, I thought, if I had a backwards telling story that added mystery. The book starts with three grown-up men. They're sitting outside a house in the woods. They're crying and they're bleeding, and they're beaten up. They're bloody, and a police car comes down. Then, as a reader, hopefully, you ask yourself, okay, what happened here? And then the next chapter is 2 hours earlier, and they're fighting. And then you ask yourself, okay, why are they fighting? And so on. So I thought that that use of the backward storytelling added some, some mystery to the book. Don't you agree?
Yeah, it works perfectly. It's funny because now that you're describing that you started off from that point, it's, for me, the true mystery of the book is in the story that's told forwards. The one from the childhood where you get to find out what happened to these kids and why they sort of became the way they are, or the one event. I have to say, it's going to be a little hard to talk about this without giving anything away, and I will do it. I will not give anything away. So if we're being, to anyone watching, purposely vague, just read the book. It's not that I'm like, it's not that I don't know what I'm talking about. It makes me feel a little bit stupid. So it's funny because the true mystery, I think, is what happened to them when they were kids, which is the story that's told chronologically, and sort of you use that technique what you're just describing in like the lesser mystery of like what happened that day where the boys are at the cottage where they spent the summers. So it's funny how you grafted the technique onto the other part of the story. But you talk, I guess I was gonna jump ahead a little bit. You talk about memory a lot in this book, and memory is definitely a huge part of the story. It's but what you just said is it's help in trauma, you remember things backwards. Can you talk a little more about that? Because that's definitely the part of the book that's told chronologically is someone coming to terms with a trauma. So can you talk a little bit about how memory plays a part in this novel?
No, I think that in memory in general, there's also this, backward that dimension of it. I remember when I went to therapy the first time. It's not like I'm going a lot. I went to the first time maybe 10 years ago, and I did something called EMDR. Have you heard of it?
I read your LitHub essay about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do know what it is. Yeah.
No, it was fantastic. You go to a room, and then there's a therapist that takes the fingers like this in front of your face, and then you have to follow the fingers, and then the left side talk to the right side, and then you're in sort of a half hypnosis, and the whole point of this therapy is to go backwards through the traumas of your childhood, and then you're gonna end up finding your how do you say it, the big trauma, the trauma of traumas in your life. And when you're there, you just stay there, and you just you work through it over and over and over again. So once again, it's the backward. It's a key here, I think. But I also have to say that it was also a way of getting into the storytelling, because I realized that I had so many choices, when I could write whatever I wanted to do. And it was almost like when I discovered, Spotify, what was that, 10, 15 years ago. And I thought, this is great. I can listen to whatever I want. And then I got the app, and then I ended up, I didn't know where to start, because there were so many possibilities, so many choices. So the first hour I just, sat there, and I couldn't start. So this storytelling with the two timelines, with the one, the present one going backwards, and the one from the childhood going forward, and then they meet up in the end of the book. That was also a way of me narrowing the choices when I was doing the story.
It's funny. I teach creative writing, and one of the issues. Yeah, I teach a workshop, and I've taught many different workshops, and one of the problems my students have, which is completely the opposite, is it happens as it's the worst thing that can happen to you as a creative writing teacher, is you're critiquing a story, and then you're like, oh my God, this isn't a story. This really happens, you know, and I'm critiquing it from a place of, you know, this isn't work and I don't believe this person would do this and that didn't happen. And, you know, and so I realized, this is not your book, but what I always tell my students is, you know, they're always like, but you don't get it, you know, and I say, you got to change something and let it go. Like whatever it is, like take that thing about your childhood or whatever, you know, change something so major. It can be a minor change, like if you have two moms, have two dads or whatever it is, but something where you can like let go and let that story float through you and not be so like, you don't get how it happened. You don't get how it happened. And it sounds like you had the opposite problem. When you were given so many choices, you had to find like something like that you could be like, okay, I need to have that anchor that I can center this on because like it's too big.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's funny.
It's interesting with the memories. I mean, you were talking about stories that your students write that you don't believe in, and they actually happen. That's, I mean, must be terrible, a nightmare to discover. But then it's just bad storytelling. I mean,
absolutely.
But there's also interesting how you can make up memories and make them so true. I mean, so authentic. They didn't happen in my life, but the components, the elements in the memory are there. So to that degree that it almost becomes a real memory. Have that happened to you?
I mean, yes. I mean, there's sometimes you exaggerate a story you've told since childhood. And you're like, I told this story so many times, I've added so many parts. And then I'm like, I'm not sure that's actually real, but like, it's part of my narrative that I'm going to keep telling. There's actually a really interesting New Yorker article about the woman who does that repressed memory therapy and how she's really controversial. Is a very famous psychologist in America who does recovered memories, and she refuses to graft it onto her own life. It's fascinating. It was like 3 or 4 months ago, but
okay.
Anyway,
but can I ask you, is EMDR, is that a technique that is considered scientifically, psychologically okay, or is it like mumbo jumbo?
I think it's 50-50 because sometimes it's used for, it's not fully accepted in like law court, you know, like this woman had gone to work as a consultant for like Harvey Weinstein and a bunch of other sort of sexual predators, and but not working for the survivors, but for the you know, the perpetrators. And she was able to show that he didn't remember it the same way as his victims.
All right.
So yeah, and then they're saying, I think for some people, actually, my best friend does a lot of recovered memory. She has one of the most traumatic childhoods you could have. And for her, it seems to really work because she didn't know what her mother did to her. But I think there's also an application of the science, which is really dangerous, that I don't think it's the science itself, but it's the application that people look down on.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm no expert. I just read like trashy news. So
Same here.
like, it's my news source. So did you know that you were going to work backwards to a specific trauma when you started writing it and what it would be?
Yes, I knew it pretty well. I mean, in the story, in the way that I did this, I had the story maybe 85% done in the head, and it was also like the childhood dream of once being an author that had, posted signs everywhere on the wall, swapping places and doing things like that. And for this, I had to do it because I wanted, I wanted it to be intriguing for a reader, but it was quite complicated work. I mean, the writing was, that's what I do, but also the work before, because when I wrote before about things that happened in my life, they have been very chronological stories. And so this was the first time that I got to, experiment. But I have to say that I'm obsessed with the storytelling. How do you do to tell a story in the greatest way. I mean, I that's all I think of in life. And I try to practice it all the time. In the podcast, or I write columns in a daily paper here in Sweden, and everything is about how do I tell the story in the best way. And I'm so intrigued. Also, when I'm reading books, I always get this, I always think, how did she or he make that so fantastic? And I try to, to see, the tools that they used, and I try to understand all the time. That's all I think about.
I think about how random it is, the way your story comes out based on the day you start, or the where you, like you always have to begin somewhere. And if you're in a bad mood or tired or hungover or like, none of those ever happened to me, ever, none. But how a story could have emerged totally differently on a different day and have a different atmosphere. Like obviously you work on something for a great number of days or months or years, but like how abstract and random that starting point is, and how that can really inform a story, would have been better or different if circumstances were different. Yeah.
That is, I'm sure that you agree, that's a continuing anxiety that you bear throughout the writing of the book, and also after. I think now when I open the book, I think just those thoughts, that it was so much coincidence that made this book in the way it was. And there's also, when I'm really in a dark place, I can see the different possibilities of the book, going that way, going that way, going that way. And I think that, okay, this version that I wrote must have been the worst of them, and the other ones, so it could have been a fantastic book, but here we are.
I have the same thought, and I'm like, sometimes I feel like I'm so lucky that I had that thought on that day where I put it together, because if I hadn't had that, like in my first novel, Visitation Street, it's my second novel. There's a secret first novel that I don't talk about.
You also have one.
Yeah, exactly. It's so secret that I got nominated for a bunch of awards for debut novel for my second novel that they had to pull back because it wasn't a debut novel. But
why are you so ashamed of your first one?
I'm not. I love it. It's just weird. It's just weird. Like I'm weird, and weird like I was in my 20s. It's very badly edited. That's why I'm not personally ashamed of it. They did a very sloppy job editing it, and my editor didn't really dig into the life. I was young when I wrote it, and I hadn't gone to graduate school for writing, which I needed to do to clean up my prose. I'm not ashamed of anything in the book. It's wild and weird and completely out there. It's messy on the page, and it's sort of like,
Is that the art of disappearing?
Yes, it is. It's also really weird.
Is it in print right now, Ivy?
Hey, yes, I think so.
I'll have to get a copy.
Oh, sure. I think it's remaindered in many places. You can always buy a copy. I'll send you one.
That'd be awesome.
I have thousands.
Yeah,
but in writing my second novel, Visitation Street, I remember I was driving in the country by my dad's house, and suddenly this thing occurred to me for the book, who this character was. And I think, what if I never thought of that? Like, I wasn't trying to think about it. I was like, I think my writing career wouldn't have ever been the same. Like, it just wouldn't have. It would turn it sort of into a crime novel. It's like, we're so lucky that these things happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. I agree. And also the places where you get those ideas, and then sometimes I get the idea. I got a great idea. I mean, I don't know, but I thought it was great when I was taking a walk far out, 2 miles away. And then I thought it was that place. So I was going back there over and over again to find the magic again. But I didn't find it.
I know. I drive down the same part of the road by my dad's house. Like, that's where it occurred. I was driving down the hill
Exactly.
and nothing, just absolutely nothing. I walked it every day this summer. So I want to get back to the book a little bit and actually talk about something that you brought up, but in a different way. So there are two tragedies in this book at play. One is the tragedy of the boys' neglect by their parents. And then there's the tragedy that changes their lives forever, which we don't really figure out is part of their narrative until about halfway to 3/4 of the way through, that there was one major event. And my sense is that either of these tragedies might have been enough to cause the estrangement in the boys' lives. But I'm wondering if the atmosphere in the kids' home of the sort of neglect, how did that inform the major tragedy that happens later on? And do you think that another family would have been able to overcome that?
I think that the second tragedy would never have occurred if
Really?
If the first one wasn't there already. The neglect is already there, right? So they are. I mean, I don't know how much you can say, but there's a thing. There's a thing happening to the three brothers when they're young, and they have. And I don't think that you look after your boys more if you're a sober parent, don't you think?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm trying my best.
But I agree. I think it's interesting that you tell it in this way, because always when people are talking about this book, they are talking about one tragedy, but there's and you're absolutely right. There are two, and the first one is maybe even bigger in a way, because the only thing that you want, the only thing that you need when you're a kid, that's being loved by your parents. And if there's no love there, then you fight for finding it, and then you start to fight with your siblings in order to get the small amount that is there. And I remember this very much from my childhood, that it was very low on oxygen in a way. We really had to look for the love, and we didn't find it so often. And there's I don't recall now if I wrote it in the book, but I have a so strong memory of I was in the house on the countryside. I was maybe 7, and I was there with my brothers and with my father. My mother was in Stockholm. She was working one extra week, and she was coming. And the day that she was coming, I remember that the sun was shining, and that I was laying in the sun too long purposely to get burned, because I wanted my mother to take the oil, so she could touch me,
Yeah.
And I was like lying there, and then at night when she came, I was all burned, completely red, and I remember standing there waiting to see if maybe she could just touch me, and I didn't think about it that at that point how tragic that is. But being an adult and looking back to it, I can really it's from those scenes, those examples, that I can start to explore that childhood.
Yeah. It's interesting because for me, I see there's the tragedy of their childhood, and then there's an accident, which is tragic, but that could really happen. I mean, there's reasons their childhood leads up to that and puts them in that place at that time, but like accidents happen to lots of people, and I have several friends who've gone through the same sort of accident in their childhood. So, while the circumstances might have been preventable, that sort of thing can happen. So I feel the true tragedy is definitely what they're experiencing day in, day out. And my again, horrible thing to say, the moment in the book that I found the most heart-wrenching is when Benjamin, who's the main character, who has some gaps in his memory or an interesting way of looking at the world, he's divided from the world, like there's a screen between him and reality. He realizes as an adolescent that his house is not just neglectful, but dirty, and his parents aren't taking care of him. And it's so well hidden throughout the book that that's really what's happening. And there's that moment where a teacher tells him, take care of yourself. And I just found that literally the most heartbreaking thing that in the whole narrative, which is why I thought the tragedy was the childhood.
Yeah, I really appreciate that reading of yours. That's
Oh.
it's been overlooked, I think. I mean, I don't tell how people should read the book, but I'm very happy that you bring this up, because you're very right. I think that you're right. It's that's the biggest, you know, catastrophe for the kids, not what happened in the woods, but what happened, you know, during those years when they're neglected.
Can I jump in
So,
just for a second?
yeah,
Ivy?
of course.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to kind of circle a little bit back about memory. You know, I mean, it seems like we're all, it's an endlessly fascinating thing to talk about, you know, and aren't we all the unreliable narrators when it comes to our own lives, you know, about memory. And
Yeah, I think that's so true. And Ivy, you were also talking about the anecdotes of your life that you know, in some strange ways change shape for every time that you tell them. And I have this podcast. I've been having it now for 9 years, and that's an anecdote driven podcast. So I tell stories of my life, and then I tell a story, and then I forget that I told it, and 1 year passes, I tell the story again. But I mean, it's a bit changed. It's a better story now. And then 2 years passes again, and then, you know, so you can just see how the memories, you know, they alter, they change. And I think that's, you know, the most interesting thing with memories, and maybe that's why I'm so stuck in them. I can never leave them in a way.
it's interesting because I was just going to say,
Go ahead, Patrick, and then I'm going to say something.
okay, yeah. I was just going to say, you know, I was trying to think of, you know, my earliest memory that I can come up with. And when I get way, way back there, when I'm 2 or 3 years old, you know, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between, okay, we have this family photograph of me on a little, you know, bike. And I don't know if I'm actually remembering it, or if the photograph is telling the story. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And James Salas, wonderful writer, has this great quote where he says something like, memory is more poet than reporter, which I think is a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
It is a lovely way to think about it. I'll tell you what I have found interesting is that we are doing these Zoom events. This is probably our 550th or so Zoom event since this pandemic started. And it involves conversing with people, all kinds of different people on all kinds of different subjects and manners. And to do it well, I find that Patrick and I, but me in particular, because I've had such a long life now, draw upon experiences. And as you say, Alex, I find myself telling them over again because they keep coming up in different contexts. But sometimes I tell them differently. Maybe the context, you know, has something to do with how I'm remembering something or how I want to present it. But there's something about this last year and a half and this technology that has really brought memories to the surface in a way that a more active life, I think, when we're out experiencing things more than we are remembering them,
Right.
has really a profound effect. And Alex, I wanted to ask you, because at the end, I'm not going to reveal what it was, but at the end of this book, there's a letter. And I'm wondering if really the only way that you could really wind up this story or kind of bridge what you're doing was in a letter written by one character to another. I've always found that to be an interesting thing to do, a literary device technique, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
To bring a voice present that you couldn't otherwise introduce into the story.
Yes, and also how cowardly it is in a way. I think that you can that we can, I mean, talk about that because it's discovered quite early in the book what happened. It's and it's also from, you know, from my real life. My mother died 5 years ago, and I have two brothers, and we were the day before her funeral, we went to her apartment to see if there were things that we could take to remember her by. And we met there, me and my two brothers. We don't meet very often these days, and we walk around in that apartment, and it's a strange atmosphere. And suddenly I hear a cry from the bedroom, from my mom's bedroom, and there's my bigger brother that found a note where it said, "To my sons, if I die." And it was a note from the other side. And we were sitting there, me and my brothers, on that bed, on her bed. And I remember looking down on on the notes, and then on the socks, 6 feet with socks, looking like kids' feet. And it was so strange, with the memories and everything. And to read that note was maybe the most, the strangest thing that I've, experienced. And I was very taken by it. And then it took me maybe, 3 years after that, I thought maybe that could be used to used as a frame for a fiction story, because it's such a it is so many things that, a mother that can't tell certain things to his sons, and she can't tell them until she's dead. That's, the letter can be how beautiful it might be. It's still a quite horrible thing to do, I think. Don't you agree?
Well, unfortunately, if we talk about it, I don't think it's fair in this context to really discuss it, right, Ivory? But I thought it had a very powerful, and it
I think
comes
it's fine to discuss because you don't know what she says.
Right. But it comes at the end of the story. Right? You had to put it there. And it's really the only way to bring that character's voice forward, I think.
Well, we don't hear, it's interesting because we don't really hear from her the whole story. And she's, I have a couple of questions that I definitely wanted to make sure we could talk about. One of them is, something that you said earlier about this like trauma regression, where you go backwards in time till you find this original trauma, and that's sort of the trauma of all traumas. It's funny because, well, it's not particularly funny because it's trauma, but something that I'm always like, if I read all my books, there's like this one recurring theme, which is there a moment in your past that you can trace everything back to in which you did not, that sent you off the rails? So like in every character in my novel, Visitation Street and Wonder Valley, and in these women, there's something they've done in the past that is the thing that sets them off course. In my new novel, I've decided that that's not true, and it just made it an accumulation of events. But I was interested to hear you say that, because it seems like your experience doing this psychotherapy and the writing the book are trying to pursue the same thing, like looking for the one thing that is the thing that sets someone on a different path. I was wondering if you believe there is one actual thing, or is it an accumulation of things and we just decide this one thing is to blame?
I know, I think that's, it's so hard to, I really don't think, I think that's, in a way that's in a way a bit too easy most of the time to say that certain thing was the thing that set everything off course. I think it's I think it's more complicated than that. But then again, as you were saying, your students, they were their stories were true, but they were bad. Maybe they, sometimes you have to, I think that's just the way how storytelling goes. But I really think it's like hobby psychological to talk in those terms. I really do that, but it's so easy to end up there because it's so perfect for the drama. And I can see how they, not so much in the States, but in the UK, the book is published there now this week as well. And it's so much about the brothers have to go back to the place to talk about that disastrous summer when everything broke. And you know, it's so it's enormously, you know, dramatical. And I wanted to make a story that was both that, but also the thing that you're talking about, the slow trauma that is continuing to occur for 7 years. I think it's so hard to, you know, to find that's the spot, that's the spot where it all changed.
Like, I think we as writers have this tendency to find that dramatic moment and say, okay, you know, her life changed when she convinced that guy to drive drunk and they killed somebody. But really the story is like what led someone to make that decision and all the things that led to the person saying, you know, get in the car. It's like, it's going to be fine. That's way more interesting, but I think it's way more difficult to write about. But I do want to go back to that cottage where it all went wrong, where it was continually to go, where it was already going wrong, because it's going wrong right from the start, before the truly bad event happens. I think for me, okay, first of all, I have to admit that I have one phobia in my life. I'm very afraid of fish, which is stupid, but I do not like live fish. I'm afraid of fish.
Well, yes.
Yeah,
Here.
I'm very afraid of live. You are?
I hate it. I can't touch them.
Me neither. And I can't look at them. They're disgusting. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. It's like,
No,
so the ocean's pretty much out, right?
I'm sorry?
Lee Boudreau sent me this book and I was like, Lee, I can't read this. There's this traumatic fish scene and I'm feeling like I'm gonna throw up.
The fish scene is not very nice.
No, but it's interesting to see that you also have a fear of fish, because that scene really, for me, was just, it's horrifying. I know you write autofiction. I know a lot of stuff is from your childhood, but I have to ask, is that something you know? Have you seen this happen?
Oh, no. I mean,
it's so horrifying.
Yes. no, but things that I think it's interesting that when it's proven that, you know, kids that has a bad connection to their parents, they tend to hurt animals. And I think that's so heartbreaking in a way. And I also hurt animals. I mean, not in that way, because that's so sadistic in a way. What happens is that the boys are taking a live fish and they want to fry it alive, and they do so, and that's a very, I mean, it's a terrible scene, but it comes from, you know, other things that happened in my childhood that I'm not particularly proud of.
It's very visceral. It is very well done. It's very traumatic to me because my other great fear is swimming in the open ocean after dark. And you have these two things happen back to back. And they're so emblematic of a certain type of neglect, like a carelessness on the parents' part, which I think a lot of people don't see as neglect initially. And I was sort of interested that it's Pierre who fries the fish, the younger brother, right?
Yeah.
That he did not turn out to be a truly sadistic person. And you like, it's interesting that, oh, sorry, my dogs are barking, that he sort of recovers from that a little better than I expected. You sort of play with the expectation there that he's going to be a true sadist. So I really admired that sort of switch there. And I did want to know, because you do write whatever we're going to call autofiction, or you know, whatever the word is that's acceptable. Is it and I read in your LitHub essay, which I really enjoyed, that the scene in the car with the family, I feel that your family is very similar to my mother's family, the way she grew up. It sounds very, very similar, with the two brothers, parents, alcoholic parents or distant parents. This scene seems, that's in the book, does seem to be based on something that happened to you. How is it different to write about it in fiction than it is in autofiction? What is it, the process different, or is it the same?
No, it's not the same, because I remember when I wrote this novel about my mother. My mother was an alcoholic, and it was about growing up with her. And then I wrote the book, and I gave it to my editor, and and he read it, and then we had a meeting, and then he said, well, I have some points to make, but the most important one is 75% into the book, when your mother comes out from the rehab. I really need her to, to start drinking again after 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, well, I can't, because that never happened, right?
Mhm.
No, I mean, for the sake of the story, I really need that. And I couldn't do it because I really needed to write something that was, true. And it was impossible for me to lie in that way. But here, changing the names, and I mean, the frame of the book is purely fictional. There is the big trauma in the book never happened to me. Then I could do really whatever I wanted to do. So the freedom was much bigger, I think, and I really enjoyed it. And now I'm doing the next book even one step away again. I mean, I'm back in the childhood, of course. I will never leave, I think. And I'm back in the traumas, and how, how things happen to people can affect you in the generations. But I'm taking one more step away. The main character now is a 9-year-old girl. So I'm trying to, taking small steps away from that to explore other fields, if you know what I mean.
It's funny because now I'm going to change course and say you did exactly in this book what I tell my students to do. You want to investigate a childhood trauma, but the only way to truly understand it is to take a step away and change things. So like it creates a sense of freedom. I think, when you sort of let go, because you did exactly what you took my advice. It's what I say, it's what I say is like,
have you found some genius in your class sometimes that you want to, invest money in, or how do you make it? I mean, have you found a star?
Have I found a good student? I have one or two good students. Yeah, they're okay. Yeah, there's I have some successful students, and then there's what I say is there's room for everyone in the publishing landscape, especially in America, where we have a lot of self-publishing models, and just most important to finish your project. Not everyone is destined for big publishing.
Are you still teaching on Skid Row?
I teach in Skid Row, yeah.
Yeah.
What's Skid Row?
Oh, it's the homeless neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles. I teach, but these are not the students that I'm talking about. Those students, we do not write about anything real. I am not a therapist or an art therapist, so I do everything possible not to let my students in Skid Row write about real life events, because I don't want to go there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Skid Row is often populated by alcoholics or people very down on their luck, campy, street people, as we kind of call them. There are classes being taught in prisons too. There's a lot of writing classes taught in prisons. And, if you think about it, looking at your own life, there are people whose life experiences really are fruitful for fiction, or it's helpful for them to write fiction and do what Ivy's suggesting, try to process the trauma that way. I'm always slightly suspicious of very young new novelists, because I often think surely they haven't lived enough to have much depth to writing. And sometimes if you look at the curricula vitae of some authors, you're just blown away by. My favorite is Ian Rankin. I'm sure you know who he is, because among other things, he was a pig farmer. And I always tease him and wonder, how to be a swineherd. Actually, he was a swineherd in France. How did that inform his fiction, if it ever did? But Patrick, you love people who have really interesting backgrounds that bring it to fiction, because Patrick's very fond of noir fiction and people living marginalized or difficult lives.
I love the kind of stuff that you both are talking about today. It's just right up my alley. And also, Barbara was talking about prison stuff. Joyce Carol Oates, is somebody who has taught in the prisons for many years. And she put together, I think it was part of a Kashik's series, and prison noir, and they were a fantastic collection of noir, but mostly by convicts or ex-cons. Really good.
I haven't read that.
Yeah. no,
Once
it's
you get
great.
that.
But I suspect much of it is autobiographical. You know,
Probably.
if thinly
How could it
disguised
not be? Yeah.
as fiction. Indeed so. So Alex, could we conclude by saying that, you know, you've moved from writing about your own life into mining your own life or your own memories and emotions and all to produce a work of fiction. Are you going forward? You said you're writing a new novel, but if you're going to pursue fiction rather, I was thinking about Nausgaard, you know, the Norwegian author who has done, what is it, like 6 novels of writing his own life.
Yeah.
Does that become seductive, or is there a point where writing about your own life, it kind of, you've done it and now you want to do something different?
I think that I will always come back there because I'm not done with it. I think I need to, I don't really know why, but I have come to terms with it. Before I thought to myself, I need to move on. I need to do, you know, new things. But I now realize that I can do new things, but I can still be there, you know, in the childhood. Knausgård is one of my, I mean, he's a very, I really adored his 6th book that's called My Struggle, right, in English. And he's now wrote a fiction novel called, is it called The Morning Star, maybe in English? I don't know if it's out yet.
I
So
think it's just come out. Yeah.
it's out. It's published. I just read a review of it in the Guardian. It was not a nice a review.
I read that.
Yeah, I mean that was crazy. I didn't know that you could be so mean, but it was it was terrible, and that makes me so scared to, you know, to do the same, because it's a hard thing to do. But the next book, it's about it's one step further away from my own life, so I need to explore it, and I think it's very exciting.
Alex, who are some of your literary kind of inspirations? Are you a Samuel Beckett fan, for instance? Or who do you go to for inspiration?
Well, I go to, let's see if, I go to, see if I can, I very much Scandinavian authors. I don't know if anyone's published in the States. I also like, Beckett for sure. I also like to read the old classics like Thomas Mann or Hermann Hesse or authors like that. But if there's one author that I read every single line from, it must be Hemingway. He's like the biggest idol that I have. No one will come close to him, I think.
I'm a huge fan, though. Apparently, I'm not supposed to say that as a woman, but it's true.
Oh yeah.
The Sun Also Rises is like my all-time favorite book.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah. One of my 5 all-time favorite. I love it. That and Blood Meridian. I feel like I have to find some like female authors to talk about. I'm so awful. So it's like these dead white guys. Oh, Cormac McCarthy's alive. Sorry, I shouldn't say that.
I like that picture of you and Loretta where she's reading Blood Meridian and you're reading the Dr. Seuss or whatever.
That's my 6-year-old. Yep. Oh, she was 5 then. Yeah. She's reading Blood Meridian. Got to start him young. She likes the part where they put all the babies' heads on spikes. That's her favorite part. I was kidding. Cool.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit more, Ivy, about this this work in progress, or is it?
Oh, my novel. Well, I'd like my agent's assistant to tell me what he thinks and give me his notes so they can submit it next week. But it's a book set during the pandemic in LA. I did all these Zoom events during the pandemic, and everyone was like not going to write about the pandemic. And I thought, well, okay, I'll write about it. You know, someone's going to do it. So it's about 2 women who are let out of prison on compassionate release because during COVID, because the prisons were overcrowded. And they sort of go on a it's like a kind of No Country for Old Men style cat and mouse chase through Los Angeles during the 4 days during the George Floyd protests, where the city had a crisis on top of a crisis. Like LA was completely emptied out. And then there was this weird like helicopter noise overhead, and they were, you know, curfews, although we weren't supposed to leave the house anyway. So it was like this, it was the city was really in a strange place for 4 days. So it takes place over those 4 days in LA.
Wow.
Yep.
Perfect for you, Patrick.
Yeah, totally. What's it called?
I know. Well, no, but seriously, Patrick was sending me some books to inspire this book. So it really is perfect for him. It has the exciting title, working title of Western, because it takes place on Western Avenue, which was actually the working title for my last book. I'm determined to write a book called Western. I live right by Western Avenue, but I don't know what it'll be called ultimately.
Well, thank you, Ivy. It's really been wonderful to spend time
Yeah.
with you, especially to learn to pronounce your name correctly.
That's
I'm
okay.
up
Happens
now.
all the time.
So thank you for joining us today and asking all these great questions. Alex, a real pleasure to meet you. I have one final question for you, Alex, which is, you say in the very back of the book, when you are doing acknowledgements, I quote, that you began, your dream has been one day to have a book published in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the obvious reason would be it's a big market, right? But was there some other reason why you wanted to have an American edition for your book?
Yes, it was. I mean, I have this, and maybe you will hate me, but I am a big fan of the Barnes and Noble store in New York. It's like I always go there, and it's so big that, I mean, you don't have that stores in Europe. And I had this dream of, you know, going to being in the States, because I've been there so many times, and we're in Sweden, we're very connected to the States. It's like our allies. Well, it wasn't, I mean, with the Trump era, it was a bit fragile, but we really feel that you are our closest friends, and that you protect us when we need help against the Russians. And to be able to, you know, to be able to go to the States and see your own book in a bookstore, that's the dreams of dreams.
I love that. I love this image.
I love that too.
Barnes and Noble is a giant book jewel box, which in fact it is. So I don't hate you at all. I mean, there's room for Barnes and Noble, and believe me, there's room for the Poison Pen. So we'd all be the poorer without Barnes and Noble. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. Thank you both very much for joining us. Patrick, thank you as always for doing the tech, and best wishes to you, Alex. And
nice to meet you, Alex. It was terrific. I
publishing
love the
novel.
book. If I didn't
And
say
will
it, I
send
love
you-
it.
I will send you links to the video and the podcast as soon as we are able to do that. I'll send them to both of you. So thank you all for joining us, and a reminder that because Facebook was down, that's why we don't have any Q&A from those of you who might like to have asked questions. What can I say?